Hello, friends. Welcome back to another exciting episode of the School of Self-Worth. I'm your host, Nicole Song. This is one of my very favorite episodes to share with you because I am chatting with an alumni of Your Clear Calling. So this is my Your Clear Calling Success Series where I sit down with my remarkable past students to talk about how their lives have been utterly transformed by this program. If you're not already familiar with my signature program, it is the exact step-by-step system for Asian American corporate leaders to reverse cultural conditioning and step into a life that is thriving and full of purpose and fulfillment. I am so proud of the women who take on this transformation. And today I am sitting down with Cecilia Lei, who talks about how getting laid off and going through a divorce led her to see her life with a completely new lens, and that going through the program helped her to move out of indecision and feeling like she was really living a passive life to now making fast, powerful decisions that are clear for her future. And I love her story. She speaks so expansively about what has changed for her. So I cannot recommend this episode literally anymore. Like, it is so good what she says. So tune in to hear how she's doing it. And as you're listening, if you're like, wow, I see so much of myself in Cecilia and I have such a similar story to her, and I really want to know what it's like to live a life where I am making these fast, powerful decisions, DM me powerful at Nicole Song on Instagram and let's chat because I've got something for you. Okay, friends, let's get into this inspiring conversation. Cecilia, welcome to the School of Self-Worth. I'm so delighted that you're here with us.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be chatting with you.
Yeah, well, I love that we're getting to do my YCC Alumni Series. It's really like one of my favorite things to do. And it's to bring on clients who have worked with me for 6 months or more and really to share about their experiences. And so whenever we come on, it feels like a little bit of a leap back in time to
Mm.
the moment where we met. Because you and I met, it's been more than 6 months. It's been like 8 months or so in the
hmm
fall of 2024. And could you share a little bit with everybody what your challenges were at that time? Like, what was it that was really hard for you in your life?
Yeah, so we met at the Asian American Journalists Convention in Austin, Texas. And I remember you did a call out in like the Slack channel for AAJA, just asking for folks, asking folks if they have things that they need help with in terms of support around career coaching and figuring out their purpose and things like that, to reach out to you directly. And that really resonated with me because at that point, I had been laid off from a pretty demanding job for almost a year at that point. I think probably around 9 months or so. And I knew at that point I was recovering from burnout. I think I had sort of the language and the experience with therapy and everything else and awareness of mental health to understand that the sort of stagnation I was feeling and also the lack of drive and motivation to just go full on into a job search was related to how tired I felt, like literally very depleted. But at the same time, I also had this keen understanding that I really wanted to feel purposeful, that rest is not really just rest for rest's sake unless you really knew there was a direction or a goal. And I just didn't feel like I knew what I was working for. I was trying to honor, I think, what my body and my mind needed in that during that time, which was rest and let me not just go straight back into the hamster wheel of work quite yet. But I didn't have direction. And so that's when we met. It was a Nicole, I need help with direction. I need a sort of understanding or an outside perspective to help take stock of what I've been able to achieve and what's going on in both my personal and professional life, and to help sort of synthesize not only a direction, but also I think a sense of like where I was at. I needed outside perspective. And I think that's really why I wanted to get the conversation started with you.
I remember meeting you. We were in the lobby of this hotel. And just for context for everyone, this convention is humongous. It's 1,500 people. And so, we're having this conversation. And one of the things I really remember at that time with you is that you told me, and this is, I think, true for a lot of people who are listening. So I wanted to presence it, is that you had had so much success in your life and it had always felt like it landed in your lap and
Hmm.
had never been. I remember you telling me that, and that it wasn't feeling like you were the one who was always driving the direction that you were going in. Because I think a lot of times when we talk about purpose, that's a big piece of it. It's like, am I doing the thing that I really feel like is true to me versus what other people expect? Or if you're a smart, dynamic, ambitious person like you are, and so many of our listeners, that you get opportunities all the time. And so many of my clients are actually in this situation where they get amazing opportunities, but then you get it and you're like, "Wait, is this the one that I really want?" And do you remember that feeling you were having
Totally.
back then? Yeah.
Totally. I think it's this feeling of external validation doesn't really cut it anymore, right? Like
Mhm.
being able to meet other people's ideas of success or achievement, or being presented with the challenge like, hey, we want you to step up and grow into this role, whatever it may be, and then being able to do it and for it to still not feel entirely satisfying. For me, I did a mid-career pivot from marketing to journalism, and in my early to mid 30s, which is kind of was a leap of faith to do something like that. And then pretty soon after, I was getting recognized and presented with opportunities. Do you want to try this? Do you want to do this? And I kept meeting people's expectations, right? Like, oh, we knew you could do it. Look at, you're killing it. You're doing it this way and you're doing it your way. And, I think for most of my life, I think I got a lot of validation from other people saying, hey, you're good at something. I recognize in you that you're able to do something, rather than me organically setting a goal and being like, I want to do XYZ. It was a lot of opportunities would land in my lap, and sometimes it felt really serendipitous, and I'd be very grateful for those opportunities, but I would never really feel like I was steering my life. And I think that was sort of feeling like the big challenge at that point.
Yeah. I really remember that conversation. And so I'm curious then for you, like, what was the moment? What prompted you to say, okay, it's time for me to actually do something about this and to be the person who's steering the ship, to say yes to joining your clear calling?
Yeah, I mean, I think that my last job, I was hosting and producing a daily news podcast for my hometown newspaper, and it was a big role to take on, and I worked really, really hard, and I really put everything into it. I mean, blood, sweat, and tears, the whole cliche. I put my fullest self in there, and I feel like I stretched beyond my comfort zone in order to be successful at this thing. And then very suddenly, because of a business decision, from the owner of the company that owns the newspaper, just shut down the whole audio division. And I think it was a huge wake up call for me, because it was this recognition that it actually doesn't matter how much you invest into something to meet other people's expectations or what they want out of you. And it made me really question, how do I make smarter choices on how I invest my time? Not only, professionally and personal, although as a journalist, it feels like those things really blend a lot, personal and professional. But, I think at that point, I wanted to make sure I felt like I was, along with that same idea of being able to steer my own life, I wanted to really feel like I was making choices and being really judicious about who I gave that creative energy and investment into. And so the layoff was this wake up call for me to be like, you can work to your bone on something, and other people may sort of superficially value it, but at the end of the day, the return might not be feel as like satisfying or make you feel as seen as you feel like you should be. So it was this question of output and the return of investment, not just like money or financial, but literally creative energy. Because I think about the ways that job drew away energy from other parts of my life. So by the time the layoff happened, I was thinking about what were the other things that I put to the side in favor of trying to do a really good job on this thing. And it was a realization that there was a need to take a fuller stock of what feeling purposeful or feeling productive really looks like.
Yeah, because it's something too, which I don't wanna get in too much yet, but you worked on a lot during YCC. It was like, how do you start to separate who you are as a human from your work? And then
Hmm.
how does that still relate to purpose? Because I think sometimes people confuse that, where they think who they are as a human and my worth and value are completely correlated to my job. But then you're like, "But I still don't feel purposeful, so the job has to be perfect to then do that." But before we get
Right.
into that, let's talk first about what did you get right away? Was, like, the first thing that you started to be aware of? Like, what tangible change happened for you once you started the course?
It's this question of whether or not, are you making a choice because that's something you really want to do? Or are you doing it because you're doing it out of fear or anxiety? All the you should be doing this because of whatever voices you have in your head, whether that's conditioning from society or from family. And so it's just like this very simple question of, am I above or below the line of choice? Am I doing this out of something that feels really aligned with what feels wholly mine, like I can really take ownership of this choice and this decision that I'm making, or is it something that's really informed by things that really aren't actually satisfying in the end? And I think that was sort of a radical and very simple way of navigating decision making. And I think when you introduced that concept to me very early on in YCC, it was such a good barometer for both big and small choices I was making. Like, do I want to work an extra 2 hours right now? And just taking a pause and thinking about it a little bit more. Because I think so like a common experience for so many women is that we don't even know how to make a distinction between what's our choice and what our choices we're making because we think that's what we should be doing, and we don't even know how to make that differentiation. And so that moment early on in YCC was really defining what's yours and what's someone else's choice.
That's such a powerful way to explain it, and she's talking about one of the really foundational principles that's taught very early on in YCC, and then reinforced throughout, because it's not something even when you know the principle, it's really about the practice and the reinforcement of it, which is what you're speaking to. And what did you find then when you really could start to learn it and align it? Like, how did it change how you dealt with work? How did it change how you thought about yourself and all of those pieces that we've been and, like, and just even that feeling of aimlessness?
I think the best gift from sort of taking a step back and thinking about your choices a little bit more is this ability to give yourself a lot more grace and to be a lot kinder to yourself. Because, you know, if you decide not to take on an extra opportunity or work a little harder on this thing or fulfill an obligation that someone else is setting for you, um, it gives you a moment to recognize, like, yeah, maybe I'll disappoint someone, but this is something that feels best for me. And I think we're, as women, especially Asian American women, we're not conditioned to prioritize our needs. And so there's just this bit of recognition of it's okay to disappoint someone else. And ultimately, I know in the long run it's better for my work life, it's better for my relationships if I'm able to communicate not only to other people but to myself what I really need. And it allows you to be a lot more gentle and kinder to yourself. I think it's almost like treating yourself like your own friend, almost, because you're giving yourself an opportunity to look at yourself and be like, is this really what you want? Which is something you would tell a friend as they're navigating a decision that they're making for themselves.
Yeah. What did you discover? This one I think is really a big one for Asian American women in particular is that cultural conditioning, and what did you discover for yourself around it? Like, even pieces that you didn't recognize or understand were happening in the background about
Mhm.
why you were doing things the way you were.
Yeah, I think that Asian American women, many of them, especially myself, we are conditioned to be very responsible for other people. And we are conditioned to make choices that are practical and safe and secure, especially if you come from an immigrant family. Um, and I think that it made me realize that so many of the choices I was making was fulfilling other people's idea of who I should be rather than, as I grow and evolve over time, distilling sort of the essence of who I am, and it's almost kind of a bit of an identity crisis a little bit. I learned this through therapy and certainly through YCC and through other channels of self reflection and examination, is that you come to this point where you realize that you need to further define and get closer to who you are. And it's a little bit of a grief. I think we've talked about this in YCC too, is that as you start to peel back those layers and understand that so many of the choices and decisions that you've made for yourself are actually informed by other people's expectations, you kind of lose yourself. And there's this grief in understanding that, oh, there's still so much that I actually don't know about myself. But I would say that it's, for me, thankfully, activated this really intense curiosity about myself in a way that I hadn't had before in my life. And I think it took a lot of big, sort of dramatic shifts in my life to really think about that clearly. Certainly, the layoff was one for sure. Here I was having this job that, from the outside, looked like a position that was respected and had some public influence, and for it to not feel fulfilling even though other people thought it was such a great thing made me realize that other people's ideas of who I should be actually didn't matter as much anymore. And even though that did sort of trigger a little bit of an identity crisis, there's a bit of a relief in realizing actually the curiosity I have is not so much about what people think about me, but is a curiosity about what I think about myself.
Mm. It's a beautiful way of describing what that is, because I think especially when we have that conditioning, and I know this was true for me as well, like, let's just say we are conditioned to be accommodating. And so then you think you can only be an accommodating person until you realize you're like, I actually don't have to be accommodating if I don't want to. And I could accommodate sometimes if it feels like a good fit and I want to do it. But if I don't want to do it, I actually can choose to not do it. Right. And that's the distinction that I think is
Mhm.
really hard a lot of the times, is because we just are so habituated to doing it one way, and then you don't
Right.
recognize it. That's nothing to do with you. That's just an action that you've done your whole life.
Yeah. And I would say, one thing that you've helped me out with a lot is taking taking off the responsibility of making sure other people know and understand where you're coming from.
Mhm.
Because I think we are conditioned to over explain, and be like, I'm making this choice because of XYZ, or I'm doing this thing because here's the rationale I came up with. And I think this is the best decision for myself. Or trying to manage other people's reactions to your life or to things that you're doing. And I'm super grateful that you helped me. What's the thing that you say? It's the
Oh, I am and you are, right? Like that
I am and you
separation
are.
between you and
Right.
others. Yeah.
Exactly. That separation is so powerful. It's like other people are as responsible for their own communication and for their own feelings about things as I already feel about my own. I take so much responsibility for what I communicate and put out in the world that other I should assume other people have that same responsibility. I don't need to manage other people. And I think that's been a really sort of freeing realization in this process too.
I feel like this one is such a hard one, and I would say, like, I'm always in the practice of this as well, that we're not responsible for other people's emotions, and sometimes people are like, "That's so selfish," and I'm like, but you can't be. Like, how could you possibly be responsible for anybody's emotional state? They're not your emotions. But it's
Mhm.
so easy, I think, especially when we're young, and especially with Asian American families tend to be like, let's make sure everybody is okay. Let's make sure everyone feels good and that they're all whole. And then you have to really have this distinction of like, well, actually, I have to be okay. You can choose whether you're okay or you're not okay. Because sometimes people choose to not be okay, but that's still not your responsibility, and they have to come around to it. And I think that's where people can struggle, especially if it's like family, which I know that that's something you worked on a lot. Is like, how
Mhm.
do we have that distinction with like my family, and each of the humans in that family is responsible for their own choices, and then I'm responsible for mine.
Right, because it's a losing game almost if you're
Hmm.
constantly trying to manage how people react or communicate with you. You're doing other people's work, and you're probably not going to get credit for doing that extra work, especially if you condition other people to believe you're always going to take that role, whether it's being the manager, sort of the unofficial manager of a family, or a peacekeeper, or smoothing things over all the time. It's a losing game because you're not going to get credit for it, and you're going to have to work harder. So it's not really worth it.
It's true. It's so true.
Mhm.
Well, let's come back then to career pieces. So, applying some of the things that we've been talking about, what was you had a really big realization at the end of YCC because you were like, I want to know my purpose. I really want to know where I'm going with this. And what awarenesses did you had? You had a bunch actually right at the end, but I would love to hear you share more about that.
Yeah, I think, and I would say it's not like I've landed somewhere and I'm like, that's exactly where I'm at. Like every day feels a little bit different, but it's honoring that it's a sort of a moving process. But, not working full time for over a year is such a trip for someone like me who has put a lot of stock in being productive and being self-sufficient and supporting herself, right? And I I after like over a year of not working full time, I really never allowed myself to go into the job search in earnest, because I was busy enough with on-call work and other things like that. But I remember us talking and talking about next steps and sort of goals that I have. And I think you said this thing, you're like, Cecilia, I don't really think you want a full time job. It's not just about like, I'm not ready for it, or I still need to rest more, or I need to think more. It's like, just don't think you desire it like in your heart. That's not really what you want, and it's not what feels good. And I was like, you know, I think that's true. And it's been maybe up until that moment that I didn't even really admit that to myself, because I think admitting that to myself was almost sort of scary to say, like, I don't want to do the thing that feels most stable and most secure and most responsible. And I think that was a wake up call for me to really think about more deeply about how can I fashion and design a life that looks more aligned with the things I want to do and how I want to feel, maybe more so than what I want to do, but how I want to feel. And I think even now a full-time job just doesn't translate to feeling aligned at the moment, because a full-time job, as so many people know, is just um, it's putting all your creative energy and investment into an employer who in turn gives you a paycheck, and then it can be taken away so quickly. And I think that it was a reminder to me that maybe this is a moment where it's almost taking a bet on myself rather than taking a bet on an employer.
That's so powerful. I mean, it really
Mhm.
is to say that because a lot. I mean, the everyone would say get the steady paycheck. Parents, right? Like safety, especially coming from immigrant families. Like my parents have always really cared about those kinds of things too. And then for you to say, well, actually, that's not what serves me. And it
Mhm.
allows you more space to make some choices. And this may be for now. Right.
For
Here's the
now.
thing when I say things like that to clients, this doesn't mean Cecilia forever will never have a full time job again. We don't know. We just really don't know. But at this moment, like you and I were recording this in April 2025, like at this moment, that's the right choice for you. And that's
Right.
so much about what we work on in there is like, what's the right choice for you at the moment instead. Right.
Right, right. And it's maybe not so much like I don't want a full-time job, but it's like I don't want a full-time job for those reasons I just listed. which
Mhm.
was secure paycheck, stability, insurance, whatever it is. Like if I'm going to take on a full-time job, it's not because of those things, right? Like, and I know because ultimately that would feel good to me. That won't feel like fulfilling for me. But it's like if I take on a full-time job, it's because it fulfills these things. So it's like really sort of examining the criteria for taking on another job, so it's about crystallizing the reasons for making that decision as opposed to saying like that's a good thing and that's a bad thing.
Yeah, I love that
Hmm.
clarification.
Hmm.
And you also had some other realizations about things that you really want in your life that you had never quite admitted to yourself.
Hmm.
She's smiling because she's like, I know she only admitted them a couple months ago.
Right,
So,
right.
but what is it like? Would you mind sharing like some things that you had always kind of wavered on or
Hmm.
not really allowed yourself to want before?
Yeah, so I went through a pretty traumatic divorce. I went through a big life change when that happened because suddenly the rug got pulled out from under me. And that relationship had been what I had spent up until that point, my adult life investing in, right? Like I was investing in this person, I was investing in this future, and it was going to be this thing that I put my everything into to secure sort of the dream that I had, which was to have a family, a partner to build with, to grow with, a partner who can challenge my growth and make me a better person. And when that was all sort of taken away, it really, and it still does, it makes me question what marriage means. But, the divorce has forced me to think about the origins of that dream and why did I want to get married to begin with? And what does marriage mean now? Now that it's sort of failed in this spectacular fashion in a very traumatic way. Um, so through YCC we talk about everything. It's not just career. We talk about personal relationships and everything like that. And I think in goal setting, I think I had said something along the lines of, I want a partner. And I think that's true. We all, so many of us want a partner. And I think you asked me, um, why not say a husband? Why not say a husband? And I think on one of our calls, I said, well, I just, I don't really believe I don't know if I believe in the institution of marriage again. I don't know if marriage is something for me. I don't know if, if that dream is like a false dream. I don't know if that's something that we've been socially conditioned to think that's where we as women are supposed to end up being at. And I think it was really good for you to push back on me a little bit because it made me think about, am I letting the trauma define my future goals, or um, or is that truly how I feel? And there really wasn't a right or wrong. I don't think you were saying, Cecilia, you should have a husband and get married again, but it was more so um, really sort of interrogate why you've landed at that goal. Because I think what you were trying to get me to do was it's worth honoring an original dream. Um, and it's worth allowing yourself to imagine the same future that you had before this thing failed, because it's giving a lot of power to another person or to this life experience to just say that's no longer possible for me, because then it's that goes back to the line of choice thing, right? Then you're making decisions based on fear and based on anxiety. And so to be honest, I don't know if I've switched back to be like, yeah, I want a husband, but I think I'm in this place of being a lot more open. I'm not saying no to anything. I'm not saying, no, I'll never get married again. But I'm also not saying, like, yes, I absolutely need to get married again. But I think and just that back and forth we shared was revelatory for me because it made me, it made me sort of recognize that I was letting the past inform my future. And it was a good pause to take.
That's so well said, and it's true because I think for so many people, many of your listeners know, and if you don't, like, I'm also divorced, and it can be so easy when we have these really big public, because it feels very public to go through divorce, whether you're a public person or not, to have something like that end, and then to be like, "Is that worth the risk to do it again?"
Hmm.
And so I am always interested when, like you said, Cecilia, when someone's letting their past define their future versus allowing yourself to have the dream. Because if you have the dream that you want a partner, a lifelong partner, a husband, and children, and a family, like you get to have that. And that's always the place that I come from when I'm coaching of like, you get to have what you want. But if you're hiding what you want underneath old experiences, we're going to excavate, and dig that out because those dreams are worth having and it doesn't die, like you said, because of circumstance or person. You get to really have that. And I think for you, right, that opened up a lot to be like, oh, because I think you also were like, well, I actually want a home. I want community. Like there are actually a
Hmm.
lot more things I think that you wanted than you thought you did.
Yeah, actually, I think even more so than the relationship stuff. I think by the end of YCC, I think I put the intention out there like, you know what? I really just want to have fun. I
Mm.
feel like life
Yeah.
I feel like life had been so serious for,
Yeah.
the past 5, 6 years. There was the pandemic, there was there was the divorce, there was big career transitions, and everything just felt so serious and consequential in terms of mapping out my life. And I think in one of our calls, I was just like, I haven't let joy and fun dictate my choices. And I think that's kind of how I'm letting life sort of steer me, especially in a moment like this where life and everything going on in the world feels really heavy and very serious. And it doesn't take away from the fact that those things are serious and deserves our attention, but it also almost demands us to search and be really clear on what brings me joy and what's going to make me feel good, because it's going to allow me to make choices from a place of optimism and not fear. And I think in the same way, going back to the marriage thing, I think like I'm this person now who's gone through a good amount of life experiences, and I'm not the same person in the past anymore. And even recognizing that I'm an agent in my own life, like I can make a choice based on fun or what brings me joy, um, makes me feel more optimistic about my dreams, because I can I can sort of steer my life in that way. And I'm not someone who has to be sort of entrenched in these deep obligations and these really serious choices, because I've done that before and I can see that it didn't actually lead me the right way. So it's been revelatory to think about dreams from an angle of, um, from sort of a more light and whimsical place, because I think that can also steer you in the direction that you want to go to, as much as like overthinking. You think overthinking does.
Yeah, I think we are so conditioned into the overthinking instead of recognizing that sometimes I feel this way. It's like, well, you could do it from an overthinking place, or you could do it from a joyful, fun place. And it can be hard for us to think that that's okay,
Hmm.
especially if you're never taught that. And then, you look at the state of the world and you get all this input from the internet and social media, and it can feel really hard like that doesn't exist anymore. But
Hmm.
to me, I feel like that's actually really like the biggest revolution is to be joyful and fun in life,
Hmm.
because it's honestly these days, sometimes I don't want it to be extraordinary and out of the box, and yet it can be. But then
Hmm.
that's also so powerful,
Right, right. And it's actually like such a simple concept,
right?
right? Like, and I think life can make you forget that some of the best decisions that you can make are actually the simple choices if you sort of take away the noise of everything else. And I think, especially since YCC and our work together, um, yeah, I've allowed myself to let the rubric of decision making be actually a lot more simple and a lot more intuitive and a lot more aligned with what feels like me. And it's been, I mean, I think such a good side effect of all of that has been confidence building. Because when you make sort of a choice that feels really derived from like a very authentic place that feels good to you, and you see that those decisions pan out in great ways for yourself, it's such a good personal boost for self confidence. Like, yeah, like I have the tools and I have the wherewithal to make the best choices for myself. And I think so easily life can make you feel like you don't, especially when you face failure or what is deemed a failure. Like, something big happens in your life and something falls apart. The bad path to go on is to think about all the ways in terms of how you might be internally flawed and unable to make good decisions for yourself. So that has been such a nice sort of rerouting for me personally, um, to get back to myself.
Mm, that's so powerful. Well, I love everything that you shared here. I feel like it's I know that the people listening are really hearing a lot of themselves within what you're sharing. So thank you for sharing in such an authentic way. And I always like to hear a little bit too for you, for people who are new to coming to these communities. What was it like for you to have the women that you're with and to be with other women who are going through similar experiences?
I mean, incredible. I mean, I think that's the thing that made me feel most committed to YCC was the opportunity on an almost weekly basis to chat and be vulnerable with other women. And you know what? I would also say that I think it's made me double down on in my like in real life personal connections to connect with more women. I think we have in our social life like groups of women friends and this or that. But I think the way that YCC is structured, it allows these people to meet together and be like vulnerable in like when it comes to our professional lives. And we don't get a lot of opportunities to do that. We can be vulnerable with our personal girlfriends or our friends and things in that way. But I think in the structure of YCC, you realize that so women are dealing with issues of perfectionism and self doubt and professional anxiety. And we don't share that in a professional context. And you kind of have to almost find your people to do that with because it really does bolster um, your personal sense of confidence, to find other women who are like-minded. And the biggest takeaway is that you're not alone. Everything that's sort of what you're feeling other people feel, and they are probably struggling in solitude the way that you are, and to find that sense of comfort and community. um, we all started from a professional context, but very quickly it became very personal. And I've tried to sort of almost mimic that sense of community that I found in YCC in my personal life now. Just building connections with other women who are like in my industry or tangential to my industry, and finding very quickly that there's so many women who want to connect on different levels in their life. And that was like a real gift that you cultivated for us.
Thank you for sharing that. I love hearing that. And I love that you are bringing that to your own life because I do think it's missing for so many women. And especially in professional places, we're trying to always appear a certain way versus
Hmm.
just actually sharing from connection. So thank
Hmm.
you. Thank you for doing that. And thank you for being that in the world, which I love. I love hearing.
Hmm.
Well, is there anything that I didn't ask that you would still like to share or something that occurred to you about YCC you'd like everyone to hear about?
Um, I mean, I think like I remember when I really went back and forth with you before I committed to YCC because it's so easy to say no to opportunities like this because we very often don't put ourselves as the first line of investment that we make in our lives. We invest in our careers, our families, our partners, and everything else. Um, and so it was really kind of a challenge for me to be like, do I want to invest financially in just myself? And that's not a choice I'm used to making. And I think through, our conversations leading up to me finally making the decision, it was like, yeah, take a bet on yourself. Give yourself the space and give yourself the structure you need to take accountability for your own life. And it might feel a little unusual if you're new to YCC or doing anything similar to YCC. You could feel like, what's going to be the return? Because at the end of the day, the accountability and the validation you're going to get is really from yourself. And so it's kind of a new way of making commitments in your life. So I think YCC was such a revelatory decision that I made, because it was me sort of putting a stake in the ground and being like, I'm going to do something for myself, because I have belief that there's a lot for me to learn about myself, and I need to make an investment to go deeper. Um, and I had never really done something quite like that before.
Yeah. Well, I loved seeing, really honestly, your growth from that first place where you were like, okay, I really want to be directed, to where you are now, which is clear. And that the work is always ongoing, and I can feel it in you. And you were really so dedicated. You showed up to calls, you were working on things, and you're always in just, and when you weren't and you were having a hard time, you also shared that. And I think that's a really powerful way to show up for a coaching cohort the way that you did. So really awesome. So we always complete our podcast interviews with a little fast action questions, a few fast action questions. Are you up for those?
Sure, of course.
Okay, awesome. Okay, the first one is, what was the last thing that you watched on television?
Oh, what was the last thing I watched on television? White Lotus, like everyone else. I was on the White Lotus, and
Amazing.
I now want to book a resort vacation somewhere, because that's what I want. I was living vicariously through these rich people living these really dramatic lives, but yeah, I want a
Awesome.
less dramatic White Lotus life.
Amazing. Okay, what is on your nightstand?
What's on my nightstand? Earplugs, because I sleep with earplugs. Um, like, two books that I'm like halfway through. And what else? Some dust that I need to probably clean.
I know. I feel like there's always a little bit of dust on my nightstand too.
Yeah.
Okay, amazing. And then, what was the last thing that you tried that was new?
Last thing that I tried that was new. I mean, oh, okay. Yeah, the last thing I tried that was new is dating. Um,
Mm.
Dating is new. I mean, I've dated a bit, but I've been that girl in long-term committed relationships, back to back to back. Um, and I think right now dating feels new, because it is all aligned with what I talked about earlier, which was not so much about like, I need to find someone that has XYZ, but like, let me make decisions on who to spend time with based on what feels fun. And I think that feels really new and different. And it's just really fun. And I think that, like, I don't know, that feels entirely new,
Mm.
in terms of looking at relationships and companionship and things like that. It's not as serious, and that feels a lot better.
I love that. I remember when I was dating and I was like really clear I wanted to meet somebody. I was like, have a serious relationship. And my coach at the time was like, what if you just went on dates to have fun? I was like, what? You can
Right.
just like go have fun. But then, and it's amazing. But like now, like Michael, my partner, is like super fun. But I don't think I had ever really envisioned that. Like of all the things I had envisioned, I was like, oh yeah, we'll get along, we'll have a good time. But like fun is such an important actual quality in a partnership. And so I love that you're doing it, because you're going to now start to attract that energy into.
Right. And I think one good piece of advice about dating that I heard was, you date to get to know yourself better.
Mhm.
Sure, certainly it's about the other person and whether there's chemistry and you guys are aligned or whatever else. But I think that feels really new for me, where dating to me almost feels a bit of like this process and experiment of getting to know myself, and as someone who already went through a marriage and long-term relationships, there's still so much to learn about myself. And so the curiosity is really about me while I'm dating, which is sort of feels paradoxical because usually dating, you think about it as curiosity for other people. Um, but I'm sort of centering my curiosity for myself.
That's awesome. And if you haven't listened to them before, there's some YCC episodes with my dating coach, Andy Fornas, that you should go back and listen to if you haven't yet, because they have just like she has drops like lots of nuggets around how to think about dating. So
Mm.
anybody who's out there who's dating, those ones are for you. Okay. Our last question is what are your top three most used emojis?
Oh, let's see. The
Mm.
shrugging woman. I use that all the time. Um, Probably the upside down smiley face, and and the laughing emoji. I think Gen Z makes fun of millennials for using that, but it's why it's so useful. Like, don't make fun of us, Gen Z. Use the laughing emoji, and I will use it always.
Amazing. Well, Cecilia, I mean, honestly, what a pleasure to have you in YCC. Thank you so for sharing so powerfully about your journey today. I know it will help so many women out there to hear from you. And I'm just honored to have done this work with you. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you for just always holding space for other people and letting us get to go on these journeys of getting to know ourselves better. It's just such a gift that you give all of us. So I appreciate you so much.